On this edition of Independent Sources, lengthening food lines, city pantries nearing capacity as more New Yorkers are going hungry.
Signs of change, the hubbub over business signs in Flushing's Chinatown.
And the Circle Theater. Spanish theater thrives on New York's Lower East Side. Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Viano Ravinka.
And I'm Gary Pierre-Pierre. This week, we're coming to you from the studios at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. We've talked about the issue of hunger on the show before, and we want to revisit it on this episode.
1 in 6 households in this country is food insecure, meaning they're not always sure where their next meal is coming from. In New York, just over 1 million people depend on pantries for their next meal.
These figures only paint part of the picture, as food pantries around the city are reporting increased numbers of clients flooding their facilities since the beginning of the recession. We look at the issue in 2 parts tonight. First, in a piece by producer Zyphus LeBron, who visited one of the largest pantries in the city.
Then I speak with Teresa Hassler from the New York City Coalition Against Hunger about how the recession has affected food insecure families.
It's Thursday, one of the highest intake days for the West Side campaign against hunger. And although the lines are not as long today, the organization is recording record high numbers of food insecure clients coming in for assistance.
Now on an average Wednesday, we'll see over 300 families in a day, and that's only between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. So it's a lot of people in a short amount of time. Back in 2008, it might have been 200, 220 families in a day.
Wisca is one of the largest food pantries in the city. They estimate that they provide approximately 110,000 pounds of food per month to their clients. Still, even they are beginning to feel a bit of strain from these increasing numbers.
We're lucky we haven't had to cut the amount of food that we're giving out, and we haven't had to cut back on the number of people we're serving. That said, we're reaching a limit in terms of our staffing and in terms of the physical space inside the pantry.
The pantry usually sees clients from northern Manhattan and the South Bronx. But these days, people are coming from all over.
We see a very small percentage, maybe 3 to 5% of people from Brooklyn and Queens, but it's growing. People are willing to go further, wait in lines longer, just to get the food to feed their families.
The economic crisis is one issue affecting the food lines. Another is a 5% hike in food prices in the city. Lupien says everyone is feeling the pinch, including some people who never thought they would be standing on a food line at a pantry.
Increasingly, we're seeing people coming in who say, I never thought I'd have to go to a food pantry. I had a 6-figure job 2 years ago. I've spent my life savings. Or we see college graduates who never thought that they would need our help.
All this is being worsened by the fact that several small pantries have closed across the city over the last year. There are fears that remaining pantries may begin buckling under the weight of these lengthening food lines.
On a busy Wednesday, our line can stretch all the way down the block, into the intersection. So it's already bad. It could definitely get worse, because it can always get worse. But to pretend that it's not already like the Depression, I think is foolhardy.
Lupien is also concerned for what lays ahead. She fears that more pantries may have their funding slashed as Washington discusses where cuts can be made to address the U.S.'s ballooning deficit.
What we're doing now is making a big push to have the super committee understand our needs. That said, we're all doing this out of the goodness of our hearts and as part of our jobs. The Corn Lobby employs dozens of well-trained, experienced lobbyists who do nothing but. So we're really fighting an uphill battle.
Zyphus LeBron, Independent Sources.
Teresa, how significant is the increase in the number of people swelling up the lines at food pantries?
Oh, it's astronomical, I'd say. It's significant. Again, thankfully we're not in the time around the 20s and 30s when we saw a depression, and that's because they didn't have the safety net programs that we do now, food stamps, SNAP, WIC, programs like that. But we are seeing record increases in the lines at food pantries and soup kitchens.
How many food pantries are there about throughout the city?
I'd say approximately 1,000. And I say approximately because not that long ago we were saying close to 1,200, but because of budget cuts at every level, the federal level, the city level especially, we think there's a decrease. We think that, and we know that there have been some pantries and kitchens that have had to shut their doors because they don't have the funding available to keep the program going. So we're actually in the process right now of sending out our annual survey to the pantries and kitchens in the city, and hopefully as we get the answers from that survey, we can gauge how many pantries and kitchens have closed their doors within the past year.
And you also are relying on the recent findings from USDA, according to which the increase is also very significant for recent years.
A couple of weeks ago, I'd say maybe a little bit more now, the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, released their annual food security numbers. And it measures the levels of food insecurity and very low food insecurity. Very low food insecurity used to be termed hunger. And it releases these numbers every year on the national level. And then every 3 years, they give state numbers. And so a few weeks ago, the USDA released numbers for New York State, and it showed that compared to 2005, 2006, and 2007, measuring those numbers against 2008, 2009, 2010, food insecurity in New York State has increased 56%. And those two numbers are significant, or those two time periods, because 05 through 07 was before the recession. And so it was important to sort of capture that data and measure it to the 08, 09, and 2010 numbers. And so it's increased 56%.
And how are pantries dealing with the demand?
Pantries, you know, what we see is that the number of food or the number of resources that they've had to work with has not really increased. And so, you know, they're trying to feed and serve as many people as they can with the same amount of food or the same amount of resources. And so a lot of them are struggling. A lot of them are really asking themselves those questions. You know, how do we determine who eats? You know, is it based on age? Is it based on, you know, cutting off the pantry at a certain time? Do we increase hours? Do we decrease portions? And so, you know, a lot of them are dealing with it that way. They're entering an era that they haven't entered before, a lot of them. And the decrease in funding is not helping at all. So,
and what's your agency doing to assist those pantries?
Well, NICA supports the pantries and kitchens in New York City primarily through information, through communication, some advocacy, and technical assistance. And so we do not run a pantry or kitchen, but we definitely support them. We represent them on issues of poverty and anti-hunger legislation at the city, state, and federal level. We also have a benefits access department where we do pre-screenings. One of the things that we try to do is make sure that people who are eligible for resources, SNAP, which was known as food stamps, or WIC, know that they're eligible and actually go forward with the application process. And so we have people on staff who actually walk people through that process and try to get people connected with those benefits to hopefully make sure they can afford the food they need.
You've started the conversation by mentioning the Great Depression, and in closing, I'd like to ask you, how often do you hear that connection being made?
I haven't heard a lot of talk about another Great Depression. I think because people who lived through it at that point are either much older or maybe unfortunately no longer with us. And again, as I mentioned before, we didn't have the safety net programs that we have now. And so I don't perceive that we will have another Great Depression as we did. We've just come a long way as far as some of our policies, you know, actually enacting the food stamp program and WIC, which is also known as Women, Infants, and Children. And so they didn't have that back then. And so I don't think that it will be an exact duplication of that period of time. However, when you look at the numbers of unemployment and in the past couple of years, since December 2007 and going into 2008 with the recession, we have not really been able to get our momentum going as far as job creation and getting people back employed and getting back on their feet. And so there's definitely, you know, a sense that we're entering this really impoverished and distraught period of time, but I don't think that we will get back to the place where we were in the 30s. We just have come a long way as far as the programs that we do offer.
But just as you mentioned it, a lot of people bring it into their minds when they see the food lines that we're talking about.
Yes, a lot of them do. But also keep in mind that during the Great Depression, and I wasn't around then, you weren't around then, we didn't have even the number of pantries. I mean, the idea that New York City has even close to 1,000 food pantries and soup kitchens is something that, you know, even 20, 25 years ago, New York City didn't have the need for that. And so I don't think you even have to go back, you know, 60 or 70 or 80 years to see that that the need has definitely increased. But again, the programs have sort of helped to balance out sort of the travesty or the devastation that we've had since the Great Depression. Again, like I mentioned, the safety net programs are there, and we do have a lot more nonprofit organizations, government programs than we had then. So I really don't think that it will be that sort of devastation that we experienced back then.
Teresa Hassler, thank you for being in studio with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Still to come on Independent Sources, signs of change in Queens have some politicians in an uproar.
Before that, Marlene Peralta has some other news.
Thanks, Vianora. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic media. From the Amsterdam News, Council member Charles Barron's comments will finally appear on a televised tribute to WABC's Gil Noble. The station was flooded with calls and emails, and there was even a demonstration after many learned Barron's comments did not make it into the tribute to the host and producer of WABC's weekly African American show, Like It Is. The Amsterdam News reports that after many voiced their outrage, the comments were miraculously found and included in the special. Ms. Noble is recovering from a major stroke. A Bronx mother is starting a campaign to have a crossing guard at a dangerous intersection where her daughter nearly died. Ibelice Suero told El Diario La Prensa that her 10-year-old daughter was left unconscious after being hit by a car at 184th Street and Jerome Avenue, just a few blocks away from her school. Suero's daughter is the second student hurt in 3 years while crossing that same intersection, which is very close to 2 public schools. The Korea Times reports that many Korean businesses in Flushing, Queens are now marketing to Chinese customers. Some are advertising in Chinese media, and others are hiring Chinese-speaking workers in an effort to secure more Chinese customers. Many business owners are taking advantage of the Chinese community's increasing interest in Korean music, soap operas, food, and even fashion that's available in the area. The World Journal reports the passing of its founding managing editor, Jacob Ma, who started the journal. The newspaper claims to be the most read Chinese publication in the United States. Ma was 88. The website Our Chinatown included an op-ed by a former World Journal reporter who highlighted Ma's legacy and contribution to his community. The cause of his death was not revealed. And finally, the website Voices of New York dedicated an article and a slideshow of photos to the Nepalese community's efforts to preserve their culture in New York. The article focuses on the Dishain Festival, the most popular celebration for the community. It's an opportunity for families to come together and enjoy big feasts, similar to Thanksgiving Day. Those were just a few headlines from the ethnic media. Back to Gary and Vianora in the studio.
Flushing, Queens is fast becoming the city's second Chinatown. A sea of signs in Chinese and Korean often greet any visitor to the area. Some of the business owners see this as a way to promote the community, while some longtime residents say they can't make heads or tails of this overwhelming signage.
This has prompted two city council members, Peter Koo and Dan Halloran, to get the Department of Consumer Affairs to enforce a law that requires businesses to list their names and addresses in English. I spoke with Councilman Halloran and reporter Connor Sheets about the issue and the backlash it's caused. Councilman Halloran, just a few years ago, there was a similar bill brought forth by then Councilman Tony Avella, and the bill did not pass. Why are we seeing this effort of having business owners in Flushing put English on their signage?
Well, first of all, we have a council member in the downtown Flushing area who directly serves those constituents who's of Asian origin, Peter Koo. So he and I have been working on this together. Peter is a former president of the Flushing Chinese Business Association, the largest merchant association in Flushing, predominantly made up of Chinese businessmen, and they're all coming on board to support this bill in hopes that we can accomplish four things. The first is a legislative thing, that our fire police agents who need to get there, EMS workers, will be able to identify the buildings they need to go to, what type of building it is, and for public safety purposes be able to enter there and develop a plan of what to do when they get there. The second thing is a consumer affairs issue. When people want to file complaints with the Department of Consumer Affairs, they need to know what kind of business they're in and what the name of the business was in a way that the Department of Consumer Affairs can identify.
But businesses have had these signs for many, many years. Why now?
Well, because it's caused problems for many, many years. In fact, the first bill introduced on this issue was introduced back in 1989 by then Democratic Councilwoman Julia Harrison. And the bill got no traction at that time, predominantly because nobody could decide on what the ratios should be for the signage language and what agency in the city would ultimately be tasked with enforcing it.
Also, Assemblywoman Grace Meng, she brought together a lot of the people that were involved in this issue to create a task force, and that was really instrumental in getting the ball rolling on the whole issue. There have been some past efforts by people such as Councilman John Liu and some other people, but Grace Meng really brought those people together, and out of that, there's a discussion that started, and that was followed up by Councilman Koo and Halloran introducing the legislation that's now pending in the council, I guess. Yeah.
Councilman Koo is well liked and very respected in the community, yet the proposal is very controversial. Do you think, Connor, that this proposal will impact his image?
I don't think it's going to be negative for him. He's a small business owner himself. He has English signs on his businesses. He's been a leader in the business community for a long time. And I think the reason it won't necessarily have a negative impact is that they've built into the bill a 4-year period, I think, that will allow business owners not to have to make the investment immediately, but to take a 4-year time period to save up whatever they need to do to replace awnings or signs or whatever they need to do. It's not an immediate impact right now. So, and also Flushing's doing fairly well, and if they can sort of educate the business owners that it's in their best interest to serve the English-speaking public more, they might have a financial benefit in the end too. And
that's the second part of what we were saying. The first two issues were legislative issues and public safety issues. The third and fourth issues really deal with keeping our businesses alive. They're losing a tremendous amount of business walkthrough because of the fact that many of the people who come from different ethnic backgrounds, whether that's Spanish or English-based, feel excluded from the shops. None of the signage is legible to them, and quite frankly, they don't know what they're getting into if they go in there to shop. So that's another avenue that's very important.
And what kind of reactions are you getting, Councilman, from residents, business owners in Flushing?
Well, it's mixed. Many of the Chinese business owners are very supportive of the initiative because, of course, the Flushing Chinese Business Association has been out front talking about it. Many of our Korean merchants are less inclined to support it because they're smaller businesses who are newer there, relatively speaking, and they don't know that they have the financial wherewithal to make the change over into signage, which is A, why we included a 4-year provision to phase it in, B, we would have the Department of Consumer Affairs notifying these businesses as they go along so that they would understand they have the obligation to do this. And of course, Flushing Commons is coming to the area, so we've put money in to an investment pool which will help revitalize downtown Flushing, and that will help keep those businesses propped up during the construction period.
Then downtown. Why did the bill fail in 2006, Connor?
2006, I would say that there just hadn't been a coalition built at the time to you know, it hadn't been communicated well enough. There wasn't quite a good enough coalition. And piggybacking off with something he was saying earlier, speaking about, you know, just going back to what he was saying about, you know, English-speaking residents and Spanish-speaking residents, also even within the Asian community, Korean-speaking and reading residents might not necessarily be able to, you know, understand the signs in Chinese. And in fact, Assemblywoman Grace Meng, I don't think she's fully fluent in reading Chinese, and she says that she's faced issues with that before. So I think that with time and with enough education, I think that there will be, you know, I'm sure there'll be a few holdouts who resent having to, you know, make the investment, but over time it'll, you know, I guess seeing their other, you know, their fellow businessmen do the same type of thing, businessmen and businesswomen do the same thing, and seeing how much more business that brings to the area, you know, that might be an incentive too.
And to add to your point, I've also read opinions that the reason behind people resenting the proposal is fear of not knowing English and fear of English-speaking customers. Councilman, I know that you believe with this proposal there's going to be a bridge between the cultures.
Well, look, I'm a fifth-generation American, so my German and Irish ancestors who came here a very long time ago, and the Irish ones spoke English, but the German ones certainly didn't. What made them part of the mainstream American culture was their ability to interact in English. And whether we accept that or not, the reality is, in order to succeed in school, to succeed in the workplace, there has to be a common language, and that language is English. By enabling the Consumer Affairs Department to sort of work with these people, to bring them into the fold, and to help them with the signage as it's being created, your opportunities will increase exponentially.
Also, I think there's already efforts being made to reach out to these people, people who might not necessarily speak English fully. First of all, they could hire 1 or 2 employees that would be there to you know, help with that as they ease into learning English. And also, Assemblywoman Grace Meng introduced this booklet of you know, basic terms to get people started. You know, if you're a business owner, you know, welcome to the store. This costs this much. Thank you. Those type of things, so that people can get started. You know, with just the basics. You know?
And kind of, what do you say to those who believe that if this law was implemented, the selling point of Flushing and Queens as this diverse borough would decrease?
You know, I mean, it might look a little less, you know, exotic to have less, you know, have more English writing on signs, but I think you'd have the same offerings. You'd have the same shops selling the same things. You'd still be able to get food from, you know, Szechuan to Hunan to Korean to Vietnamese, all within a couple blocks radius, but it would just be a little easier to know exactly which place is which.
And remember, we're not saying that you can't have signs in other languages. What we're saying is, for public safety purposes, we need to be identifying the name of that store, what kind of store it is, and that the customers will be able to shop there with a baseline of understanding. At the end of the day, I love the diversity of Flushing. It's our little Chinatown, our little Koreatown inside of the city of New York, and that's fantastic. We have incredible Russian enclaves from Brighton Beach on. We have Spanish enclaves in Harlem, throughout the Bronx. We want them to keep the flavor of those cultures, but by the same token, recognize that we're in America, and to get Americans shopping there, which is what the economic issue is right now, getting people out to shop, we have to appeal to as wide an audience as possible.
Councilman Dan Halloran, Connor Sheets, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
When we come back, Spanish theater fights for its place on the Lower East Side.
How you doing? My name's Steve. My family's lived in this neighborhood for years. Recently, things got so tight, we had to go to our local food bank for help. I lost a lot of sleep worrying about what the neighbors might think. That is until I saw them there, too. How'd I do, Steve?
A little stiff. You could have done a little better.
What? Come on. You know, I have an Academy Award.
Yeah, but not for playing me.
Play a role in ending hunger. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger and find your local food bank.
And finally from us tonight, founded over a decade ago by a group of young theater scholars, Teatro Círculo is now a thriving small black box theater company in the East Village. Their mission, to bring the best of Spanish language contemporary and classical theater to New York.
Producer Judith Escalona tells us more about the theater in this report.
Teatro Círculo is a boutique Spanish language theater located in Manhattan's Lower East Side. It was founded 17 years ago by Puerto Rican students studying for their PhDs at the City University of New York Graduate Center. Their mission? To present the classical and contemporary theater of Spain and Latin America. Although other Spanish-language theaters, such as Repertorio Español and the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater, include classical Spanish drama in their programming, Teatro Círculo seeks to uncover how that theater was originally performed.
There was a time in Spain in which the classical theater was banned, and that prohibition lasted 150 years. Because of that hiatus, we don't know how this theater actually was represented. Part of our desire to do Spanish classical theater is we want to investigate how this was done.
Teatro Círculo is the first Latino theater in Manhattan to own its space. They were one of 11 small theater groups to buy their building on East 4th Street.
Years ago, Mayor Giuliani wanted to sell these buildings to developers, and we get the block organized, and we stopped that, thanks to Margarita Lopez, who really stopped the selling of the buildings, and she proposed that these buildings be sold to the organizations.
Former Councilwoman Margarita Lopez had East 4th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenues designated a cultural district, one of 2 in the city. That staved off developers and guaranteed the continued presence of Latino theater in the downtown art scene. The theater also showcases new works such as Carmen Loisaida, a retelling of the Carmen story that draws from the French novella and the popular opera by Bizet. Eva Vasquez, a founding member, wrote and stars in the play.
I was always aware of the fact that it was written by a man, and that it was written by a French man about a Spanish woman, a gypsy woman, who was not part of the, let's say, the leading culture or the mainstream. In the last 10 years, I became aware of different versions of Carmen that were trying to subvert that reality.
Vasquez added her own version to the trend. Carmen Loisaida is about a Puerto Rican woman in the Lower East Side whose friends and neighbors are from Latin America, many living in fear because they are undocumented. The play's music is contemporary salsa, merengue, and bachata. All the productions are presented in Spanish with English subtitles. This helps draw a wider audience. However, Oliveira says that Latino theatergoers are still the majority filling the seats.
There are probably 11, 12 very active Latino theater companies in the city. And if every one of us would do a performance every single night of the year, it wouldn't be sufficient. We need 13 more companies in order to, to bring enough theater to the Latino population that we have now. So the Spanish only is not an issue for us at this point. Maybe in 20 years, in 25 years, would be an issue.
This season, Teatro Círculo is collaborating with the Latin American theater troupe Grupo del Sur to present Passport by Gustavo Ott, about an immigrant's nightmarish return home. That will be followed by The House of Bernarda Alba by Gabriel Garcia Lorca, a meditation on the tyranny of mourning. I'm Judith Escalona, Independent Sources.
The House of Bernardo Alba, a modern classic by surrealist poet Gabriel Garcia Lorca, opens soon with Puerto Rico's grand dame of the stage, Lydia Echevarria, in the leading role.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned.
Till next time, be independent-minded.